Welcome to Intentionally Disturbing. I'm Dr. Leslie, and today's episode is with Jeremy Viking. Now, he can be followed on TikTok as Viking, and he is an amazing man. He spent a long fucking time in prison, but actually what we honed in on was what he learned, how to tell who is a perpetrator, who is not, and how to listen to those red flags that pop up in you. We talked about the shopping cart, and no, he wouldn't put his fucking shopping cart back. And one thing he said that was so notable was, even if the perpetrator doesn't do it to you at that moment, they're going to take note and they're going to come back and do it later based on what they have just learned about your choices, your actions, and your behaviors. So I hope you enjoy this episode and you get an inside scoop on a man who lived in prison for a long time, and he can tell you the truth about a predator. Oh, hey. You're here. Okay, I'm so excited you decided to say yes and do this.
Yeah, me too. No, definitely. I love your show.
I mean, I started watching your TikToks and I was like, he's telling the truth because I've worked inside.
Yeah. A lot of people at first were like, no way. And then I'm like, oh, let me break it down a little bit more. And they're like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's really horrific. Yeah.
Well, one thing I really like too is, so I was always working with like the mentally disordered felons. And so they're technically, a lot of them were patients and I can't talk about them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you don't have the same level of like having to keep all these fucking secrets, and you can actually talk about what happens in prison.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love it.
Yeah. It's and especially now with like, they don't have, in Florida at least, like as far as people with psychological issues and that, they just put them in regular prisons and they just give them meds. So they're housed with just a regular inmate. And they're like, it's crazy how that literally, like.
Yeah. It's well, I mean, and just, it's so dangerous. I mean, that's what I want to talk to you about is like the reality of prison. So, we hear everything on the media, but people don't know what gassing is. People don't hear the word chomo. People don't know that the custody officers help get people killed.
Yeah.
And so I just I wanted to like kind of pick your brain about a lot of it, but also get, what was it like for you? I want to get your experience, especially as an adult in the Florida prisons.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that definitely is, you have to go insane to remain sane in there. Literally. You have to like accept a whole different world. Like this is, and then it becomes just normal. Like the stuff, like you said, like seeing the corruption, the killings, just everything. You're like, oh, this is you just keep going. And then it's like, all right, release, bye. And you're just like, it's very, whatever. We go down the rabbit hole of it.
So can I ask you questions? Is that okay?
Anything you want to ask.
Yeah. I guess the first question would be, what stands out to you as some of the worst stuff that occurred? And not necessarily like the most, I mean, granted, we have no filter, so we can say whatever the fuck we want to, but like what stood out to you in your soul as the worst?
So I would say the way officers do illegal stuff already, and then it is what it is. You're in prison and that's what it is. It's a very crazy environment of people, and they almost become like reverse Stockholm. Like they are trying to fit in with the prisoners. It's very weird. But then some have the power trip and they have their own like rules of engagement, and seeing how they set inmates up where, for instance, there was an inmate, and I spoke about this before, and his name was Ricky Martin, like the singer, but not the singer. And he had his issues. He was younger, trying to fit in and everything, but he didn't understand how dangerous it was. So there was like a fight club where the officers were putting inmates to fight each other, or say one inmate had an issue, they'd take you both to confinement, put you in the same cell, and just put you in there for 20 minutes and gamble. And it was just going on and everywhere. And he ended up writing up about it. And they put him in the cell, and they didn't like it. So they transferred him with, I think, 6 months left. And they put him in the cell with the notorious killer, rapist, this dude, and let him get beaten and raped to death. And they called the family and just played it off like nothing that wasn't their fault, was an accident. And it was like, at that moment,
Yeah.
and that, like, seeing that stuff, it was like, in my mind, especially going in at 22, 23, knowing that I'll get out right as I turn 30, it's like, oh, I'm never going to go home. So I became like, I just had to learn this whole new world where, it's the officers will put you in positions to where you're going to end up having to get a life sentence or not. And you're either like almost either going to be a victim or you're going to be like a warrior in some way for yourself.
So
And it's,
wait,
yeah,
let's break this down. So Ricky Martin, not the singer, gets gets put in a cell on purpose by
yeah,
officers in order to be brutally beaten and raped by somebody who's up for it.
yeah. So they never proved that. And it's like when you see things like what happened to that inmate, Brooks in New York, I believe, that was beaten by the 14 officers. And like, people are like, what's going to happen? They're just going to probably fire them and maybe one guy will get a manslaughter, but they control the world. Like,
Yeah.
that's their world. They have their own kangaroo court. And so when he did that, it was like real wild in the panhandle of Florida, in like northern Florida. And you had a place called ACI, Holmes Correctional, all these different, it was like a triangle. And they would ship you here, ship you there, and just keep you in rotation and hide you from your family and all that. And he was always like, he wasn't, how do I say, he was very confused. Like, he didn't know where he fit in. He didn't, like, he came from like the streets trying to be like a gangster and then realized that, oh no, I'm not like that. But he had already befriended the wrong people. And when he wanted to get away from it, they're like, oh, it doesn't work like that here. You have to pay, or you have, so he was getting extorted and abused. And they were having a fight clubs going on. It was really just like, they called it like gladiator fights, and they put you in the cell, wherever was going to happen. And it could be a chomo, a child molester. And like, they would then right after, they would gas you, like pepper spray you, beat you, and put you in the showers. Or sometimes they'd give you a food, cell phone, whatever you would want. And he was trying to get away from where he was at because he was getting like really abused by the officers, physically, mentally. And so he wrote to the higher up saying, hey, they're doing some fight club here and I want out, not knowing that the officer that's getting it is helping, he's the
Yeah.
boss of the other. So
Is it
then
it would be like the special investigative unit?
yeah, well, before any mail can leave anywhere, it has to go through a captain or the like somebody. If he tries to write it to where it's some higher ups, if he's writing a grievance, so it would have to go to an office. But that officer is just probably best friends with that sergeant who's doing the same thing. He's probably
Yeah.
gambling on it too, and he probably went down and said, "Hey, you need to get things under control before this gets an outside incident." And they didn't ever get convicted. However, they grabbed him up, cuffed him up for writing that, and they put him in the cell with a guy that's twice his size and is doing a life sentence for murder and a lot of violent crimes and is known to sexually assault, stab, and he's that's what he does. He's in a cell by himself, and the kid, Ricky, was not a kid, but he was 22, a young man, and he's screaming, "No, no, no!" And then he got in the cell and he was trying to cut himself with like razors and all this stuff to try to do anything to get out. And the guy screams in the tier, we're all locked in a cell 24/7 in Florida, no air conditioning. It's hard time and confinement, isolation. And he's like, y'all want to see me, whatever, killed it, like whatever he screamed about hurting this kid. I don't really remember. And people were cheering him on, other people weren't, but it went on for 15 minutes and he was just
So
stomping his.
you guys could hear it all. You could hear it all, and people are cheering it on.
People are screaming, other people like are just being quiet, other people are, everyone's having their own reaction. And it's one of those things where, for me being 23, 24, and in isolation, where, like I said, you're lucky if you shower twice a week, no air conditioning, they barely give you toilet paper, it's 110 degrees, they put the heater on, it's hard, and they're doing all this gladiator stuff. So in my mind, I'm like, I just don't want to get caught looking at, I don't want to be seen looking into any of this, because that's how it conditions you. So this kid's brutally getting tortured in there. Finally, 15 to maybe 19, 25 minutes later, they come. It's always like an awkward time, so they can. I don't know why they do that. Maybe to look better. Like we were just on our way,
Yeah.
and
Count
they
time.
come in there, yeah, and like they walked away. And the thing about isolation in Florida, especially, is they're supposed to check every 15 minutes, every 15 to 30 minutes on the inmates because everybody's in there because they're management problems for the prison. And they just let it happen. People were beating on the door, screaming, and he would stomp his head in. I mean, it's all over the news. Like people can search on Google. And then they found out that he was getting tortured sexually, physically, mentally, and they got him out. And the family didn't find out for like 3 days. And it was like that's when things were so real, but it was almost like at 23 it didn't even surprise me that happened until I got out and was able to process how, like, what the fuck did I go through. To me it was like, okay, now I know, it was just like it was just a lesson of what not to do in my mind, or almost like they make it seem like he deserved it. That's the
Yeah.
mentality that they instill. Yeah, that was a bad thing, yeah, real horrible. And the family, they picked up the body. It was just real, and he almost went home in 6 months. And he wasn't a bad kid. He was just
Yeah.
a troubled kid at 23, 24 years old, in there for stolen property, doing a year, less than 3 years, but had like a year left to do, maybe 6 months. And they put him in a cell with a guy twice his size, a lifer that's a convicted murderer, rapist. Like, come on, and they say, "Oh, we didn't know. We try our best." It's like, yeah,
It's insane. I mean, I think people don't understand too that you don't go to prison because you're a horrible person all the time, and you don't go because you
yeah,
did massive crimes all the time, but you end up in this mixed bag of
yes.
crimes and psychopathy. What's your rap sheet, if you
So
care
for
to
me,
explain?
yeah, I have nothing to hide. So with me, like, I wasn't really, like, don't get me wrong, it's bad no matter what you do, but I wasn't like this hardcore criminal. I was doing like I'd say, to maybe compartmentalize it, dirtbag on dirtbag crime. I was just with my friends. We rob drug dealers and sell and make money for their shit or their stuff to do that, and then party and bar fights, like stuff like that. It was like very serious, but it was just like we were just living in the moment. And obviously, it has a lot to do with situations I grew up in and that. But as far as it was like just robbery on like a drug dealer, battery, everything was like that. And but at the end of the day, you're committing crimes. You're running into people's houses. You're fighting. It doesn't matter who they are or what they're. You can't do that. So when I was like in my teenage years, I spent about 3 years in the juvenile prison system. Got out, was trying to do right. Well, not trying, but I believed I would. And then at 22, I robbed a drug dealer's house and ultimately got caught and went away. 22, 23, 24. Got right out as I turned 29. So yeah, I did a lot of growing up in there. And,
Yeah.
it's,
What's
there's
it
no
like?
excuse.
What's it like for you emotionally to reflect back on your time inside?
So in the beginning, I didn't understand how what I went through and what I believed to be right, per se, like, was just so twisted. And looking back and the way, telling a lot of stories of people I've met and situations I've been in and seeing, what I cover on my page, it's like, not that I'm cold to it. It's just, it makes you become either the best version of yourself or literally the worst version of yourself. And luckily for me, I wanted to change and become better, but I use it more as, like, I would say it's like the horrific, just as a tool to say, okay, well, this situation we're in now, but remember that time when this happened or that happened. And of course, some things you can't unsee or unhear. And it's a lot of violence and corruption. And it's hard to truly trust people. And you always have your head on a swivel. And like you said, people can go in there with a little bit of time and go to some easier prison, go home, have no problem. But then they'll send somebody with 2 or 3 years and he goes to the worst prison in the state and ends up never going home or getting 20, 30 years or whatever happens. So that mentality has always been like that can never shake. Always just being aware, always, it's good and bad. Like for my son, it's like whoever his teachers are, I'm doing a full background check on everybody that enters his life, who's here, who's there, everybody
Yeah.
here, like everything. But then at the same time, and especially working in the beginning, I would compare people like, oh, he would never survive. Oh, he wouldn't. And it was such a crazy, callous way to look at life. So and then once I guess, how do you say, life is life, right? Like you lose family members and things catch up to you, and it's like it all just like kind of builds up. And for me, it was like I was so tired having this hate and this unfounded anger, and I was living right and working and still am, obviously. And it was just like I just had to let it go, and I found better ways. But for some people, they're broken. They get out and they can't handle it. The isolation breaks them. They have no social skills. They're always paranoid, and it all stems from usually childhood trauma. And then they go to prison and get a lot more trauma, and then they get out, and it's like, go work your job now. Go now.
Yeah.
And they're like, uh, and yeah, they were criminals, but a lot of people's situations stem from when they were children and the environment. Not everybody, but so it's a never ending battle. It's just I just know that I can never give in to any emotions except being the best father for my son. Period.
Can you?
Because I don't want him. Sorry. Good.
Oh, no, it's okay. But can you tell me kind of about the moment it clicked for you?
Yeah. It was probably about 3 to 4 years into my sentence, and I did a lot of time in confinement because it wasn't like I was trying to be some bad person in prison. Just when you're young, you feel you have to like go above and beyond, and especially when you're in North Florida, it's more country, and I'm from South Florida. They look at you like, oh, look at Hollywood. So much things were like presented to me, violence, and and I think it was about 3.5, 4 years of just the stabbings and the fights and the riots, the corruption. And at the same time, I became somebody I never became before. Healthy, strong. I was reading, working out, real in touch with who I was, humble, yet I couldn't show that on the surface. And I was like, man, I really want to show this person who I really am to a relationship, to a kid. I want people to know me who I am. But at the same time, it was like I have to balance this world of just complete chaos. So about 3.5, 4 years, and I was in confinement. I was like, I have to start manifesting something. I have to get a plan going. But you can't share that with somebody because it's a weakness to somebody in there or an officer. Like, oh, look, he thinks he's better. It's so I just kept building internally. And then once I made it home, I started to go after exactly what I had planned and manifested and just shook all that out of my head. But, some things just can't leave that easy.
We'll be right back after this break. Do you think that you have a mental health disorder now? Like, is there a trauma? Where does all this shit go that you experienced?
That's a good question. So I know that, of course, there's always going to be some type of like traumatic, post-traumatic stress, anything when you see and go through these violent situations. It's just all this constant every day, whether it's mental, physical, anything. It's just, I guess the same trauma that was there to break me and all the chaos. At the same time, it made me have to go into the fray, and there is no, you don't have the luxury in there to say, I'm feeling down today, I'm just gonna work on myself and do a self. It's like it's immediate chaos, immediate violence, it's drama. The officers of this happened, this part. So I think having that same horrific, chaotic environment also made me be able to not compartmentalize, but be able to say, all right, yeah, I feel the pain. I have empathy. I know what I feel. But at the same time, I don't have the luxury. I'm so far behind. Like I use that same mindset to stay as if like, I can't leave my son in any situation that I was in. I can't leave him vulnerable. I have to protect him. I don't have this luxury. So I use that same thing. And then I got into a lot of like martial arts and kickboxing and a lot of healthy activities. But at the same time, don't ever think it ever goes away. Those always in your head. The silences could be very loud sometimes, and you start thinking about so many people that are in there and or that got killed, like that guy Ricky Martin, and just so much horrific thing. Or people that get out and they were never drug addicts before, but they get out and go straight to the needle and they die from fentanyl, whatever it is, because they can't cope with anything. And like you said, there's no one to talk to. There's no one to be like, hey, this is because they're going to be like, you shouldn't have been to prison. You shouldn't have, and it's just, so it's like I had to use that same mentality that was like there to break me to make me become the perseverance person, I guess it's the best way I could put it.
Yeah, I mean, as a clinician, as a psychologist, I thought the teams in the jails and prisons were shit. Like it was
Oh,
like the bottom of the
yeah.
barrel of this field, and I was horrified. And that's part of the reason why I left, because I didn't want to level down.
It's almost like if you're not part of the problem, it's like the reverse thing. If you're not part of the problem, you're not part of the solution over there. Like they want you to be problematic there. Like and I've seen this happen where somebody would put their mistrust, say somebody was really having a mental breakdown in there, whatever they're going through, and they would talk about it with somebody that was there for mental health treatment, and they would go tell an officer, and the officer would go tell everybody, hey, he's over here telling about you, and like put the guy in the scope. So that's another thing, like you said, where the bottom of the barrel, or they're having full on relationships, or they just don't care. Like, I don't got time for this, or they're bringing. So you learn, like,
Yeah.
okay, I cannot trust anybody. Like, there's no law and order. There's no doctor I can trust or go to. You just have to learn to everything to be your best at it. I guess it's either, like I said, like people become their worst, they break and they just get lost in that fray, or you just learn that
Yeah.
nobody's coming to save you. No doctors, no one. And it kind of pushes you one way or the other. It's like two extremes.
It's wild. I mean, like you and I, okay, we're both parents. I don't consider myself paranoid or overly vigilant, but I am watching more than anyone else. Like I don't know how to explain to people, like our level of awareness and alertness is not negative. It's
Yeah,
not a side effect of mental health or trauma. It's because we've seen real shit in the capacity of the human mind and what it can do.
so true. Yeah. I mean, you said it the best. And like a lot of people say, oh, you're overreacting. I say, oh, no, like that's what they always say before it happens. Oh, because we've seen where the system will literally leave a kid in jeopardy until she or he is truly hurt or dead, or something horrific happens. But it could have stopped 2, 3 years ago with, the 20 different calls to social services. And it's
Yeah.
very like, and that's the same thing with me. I saw it from the inside of like, oh, like, and this guy was a coach, this guy was a teacher, this person was this a cop. And it's just very hard to balance that, especially in today's society where people feel, oh, you can't do that, you can't be. No, I can 100%. And that's it.
Yeah.
It's my son. And I know, like, and it's usually the people telling you you're crazy are the ones that are truly deceptive. And that's what I've learned. And they'll say, you're crazy, you're paranoid, the prison's got, no, I know, I'm the crazy one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
I
the
mean,
crazy one.
can you give me maybe some facts related to that? So how many people did you come across in prison who, like, their victims never saw it coming? You talk to prison staff, you talk to other prisoners, and they would say, "Oh, I thought I was fine with the guy. I didn't see it coming. He seemed fine."
Yeah,
And that's what everyone fucking says.
yeah, it's that explosive violence where it's, and like there's like the inmates will say, like, to an officer that is like real corrupt, or I mean, like, you have to get lucky every day. We only have to get lucky once. And it's basically like, it's always that person that's going to get in your good graces. Like, it's your enemy is never an enemy. It's your best friend. It's the teacher. It's the coach. And that's how it goes. They're going to be the knife in the back. And that's 90% of all incidents that happen. I never saw it coming. Or an officer gets killed and they make it, but he was alone or too friendly. And it's like, well, we didn't see it. Like, or
Yeah.
even an inmate. Like, I thought that officer was nice to me. And you did see it coming. You just didn't want to accept the reality. But a snake is a snake. They're just going to
Yeah.
shed their skin and become bigger and bigger. And that's true. That's very, like, as far as prison goes, that showed me that it's not so much don't trust, it's always just learn everything possible about everyone that comes in contact with your personal life, because there's truly masters of manipulation. Some people just go to prison to work, and they're just like maniacs. Like they love to torture and to put people through that. And same with inmates. They'll pretend like the most evil ones will be the ones in there that are sick, rapists, child molesters, chomos, all that. And they're the ones that go in there and they have the glasses on and they're acting like they're the grandfather. And he's bullying me. Stop. I'm an old man. But it's like, look at his record. This man has hurt 10 different children since the last. And you're like, oh, no. But all those other people, they always thought, oh, he's just a nice guy. And you see them turn it on and off, especially in prison when they're in danger. They're like, oh, I'm disabled. It's just all a conspiracy. And it's sick. It's twisted. It is, like you said.
So for people listening, how can we explain to them like how to listen to red flags, like especially around child molestation? Because for me, the chomos, the pedophiles were always the ones in prison that I wanted to be around more because I felt safer because they weren't going to hurt me.
Yeah,
right. And they were also the sweetest. They knew how to put on the charm. They knew how to, like, their egos didn't get in front of their mission.
Yeah, they're like, their whole thing is they're little snakes, like whatever it is to survive, because they go after the vulnerable, obviously. And it's that's their MO. And the way that I think people have a misunderstanding is when something happens and they, even if it's a feeling or whatever, intuition, and as a parent or anybody, when something's not right with your kid, people won't act immediately because they're scared of how they'll look or their friends, or it might, fuck that. You have to, the second you let one of these evil fuckers get any type of leverage, that's it. They're going to say, why didn't you react? It's better to be wrong 1,000 times, and then miss it that one time.
That's why I did that fucking shopping cart video. I don't know if you saw that video, but I just basically said, don't return your shopping cart if you have put your groceries in the car and your kids are in the car and there's a point of vulnerability. And even today, I got another death threat saying, return your cart or I'll kill you. And it's just like, guys, we have to not look at judgment. We have to trust our intuition.
100%. I mean, that's the truth. Like, you cannot. They're already looking for the vulnerable, and even then, even if they don't act in that situation, they'll take a note, these predators, and say, "Oh, look at them. They leave their kid alone in a car like that. All right," and they'll just keep that in their mind, and they might not act on that impulse then, but that's the game they play.
Yeah, I think that's fucking brilliant what you just said. Like, even if they're not going to do it now, they're going to take note.
100%.
And we're so naive to think that if we didn't get snatched or if they didn't get snatched at that moment, we're fine.
Yeah.
That there's so much planning and preparation behind predators.
A predator is a coward. Like, that's what they are. They go after the weak, the vulnerable, and they're opportunists. That's what they do. They're snakes. They don't go after someone like me that's just walking by myself and grab me and say, hey, come here. Yeah. They're going to go after the situation that they know they can control and dominate or sneak in and prevail. So even if you see somebody and you're like, okay, obviously I'm not going to leave my son alone or my daughter alone for a second. At the same time, this guy is looking way too hard because when something's not right. Pick up the phone and call out. Or if you see some guy, hey, can just anything to bring attention to the situation. And you could be wrong, but you cannot afford to ever be right in that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If they're right and you're wrong, then that's it. There's no more coming back from that. And the rest of your life, that kid is hopefully, can live, but it's going to be destroyed mentally. You're going to be destroyed mentally. And it's all because you wanted to live up to a social standard that doesn't protect your child. And in prison too, like, I have a hatred for predators, and I 100% did my share of making sure they received their justice. But 1 in 4 inmates, and I talked to a lady that worked in there, have been around some type of, either they were sexually abused as a child or a family member, or they saw something, and that's where a lot of the hate comes from. Obviously, anybody sees it and they're like, oh my God, like what the, like they feel that anger immediately. And then it's amplified is like, wait a minute, I remember when I was that kid. And that's a huge statistic. Like 1 in 4 have seen it, been around it, failed by the system. And they think in their head, why would my mom have left me in a car alone? They know a lot of them probably feel like that. And that's how they got to look. Like, how do you think your child would feel if you went to go return a card so you can be socially norm and say you did it, and then some guys in the car or whoever, some predators in the car, now your kid is, and that's all they got to feel. Feel how your kid would feel, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the best advice I can probably give on that.
I'm sorry. It's time for a commercial. I mean, that leads me to a good question. What, as an ex-con, what are the soft points that you look for, that you did look for in targets?
Well, for me, like, I'm not minimizing this. You know, I was robbing drug dealers, and we're all a bunch of dirtbags being dirtbags for each other. So it was kind of like somebody would say, hey, like, this person here, or a girl would set up this guy, but we were like doing it more for the rush in a way. However, in prison, I remember a specific situation. I talked to a friend of mine I grew up with, and his kid used to go to a park. And this park was like a well-known park where I grew up. And this guy was putting kiddie cameras or cameras in the kiddie bathroom. And he was selling it, whatever he was doing. And if you looked at this person, you wouldn't even think anything of it. You would just think this is just some regular guy working out, whatever. And I remember getting an officer to tell me what happened. And it all got to me that that guy is the one that was putting, I think it was like 90 kids that were in this huge case. And he was just putting the camera in there, putting the camera in there. And nobody really cared. And it turned out this guy was already a convicted sex offender, should have never been at the park. And everyone's looking back in hindsight like, yeah, he was kind of creepy in this. But like, nobody said anything because they didn't want to. And you have to look at that situation. And I go up to him. I already know everything he's 100% about. Like, I already know everything. I've been briefed, and especially what the situation is. And I want to see how he responds. And I go, hey, what are you in here for? Are you a predator, sex offender? What's your deal, man? And because he's, and he's like, well, what's your definite? And immediately you see this snake of a human come out, and it's like the victim, his body language, his posture turns into like almost like he doesn't want, I'm not anything. What's your definition of a predator? I mean, I'm here really for burglary, but and he's trying, and it's like, oh no. And they can immediately just play that long game. And so many people will say, you know what, you're right. We'll just leave them alone. But for me, I had no mercy on any predators. As horrible as that sounds, there's no, it's like when you watch it on TV and you see it and you're like, how did this happen? How did this guy, a lot of times parents one of the most common things was a boyfriend or a girlfriend will become the babysitter that they've known maybe 3 months. And then you see it happen and the guy goes to prison. And that just,
and the grooming and how sophisticated the grooming is that people get sucked into. Yeah.
And you'll see it in prison. Like, it's almost like, this is how you're like briefed in prison. You get there, I'm 22, 23. I might see somebody that I know I grew up with. It's like 6 degrees of separation. I know somebody. And I'll say, hey, what's up, man? How are you? What's going on, Viking? Hey, listen, this guy here is this. Watch out for this guy. He's a rapist. This is a gang. They extort people. All right, here's a knife. Here's a weapon. All right, man, see you later. And you're like, all right, so you're ready to go. And you watch, and you'll go, and you'll see somebody, and you'll say, hey, man, look, stop talking to that dude. He's going to try to rape you. He's setting you up. He's grooming you. He's going to get you. And dude's like, man, and it's either they listen or they don't, but it's like, we don't have time to like really go into it because we're trying to survive ourselves. And you'll see first the guy will start off with like, hey, man, I'm trying to get some canteen for my family, but I can't read or write. Just something so simple. So the guy helps him. And then it starts off like that. And then before you know it, you look and the guy's fully just turned out. And
okay, question. If you could commit a crime and get away with it, or legalize something that's currently illegal, what would it be?
The best thing I could say is that they need to, legalize killing child molesters or doing something where there's so many that live around these kids, and there shouldn't be where they're going to get rehabilitated and come home in the community, and it should be that's it.
Yeah.
You're done. Like it's it. To give the parent of, like, if you can prove it 100%, God for, it is like, okay, well, you have to die. You forfeit your life now.
Yeah.
Like, it should be just as serious as murder, if not like just an automatic. You forfeit everything. You should be castrated and everything like that. So not so much like a crime of passion. I don't know how to say it, but
Yeah.
just to exterminate these child molesters, that they're the worst.
Yeah.
They don't stop until they're stopped.
I mean, I agree. I've been around ones that have been castrated and still offend. It's not about sex all the time or stimulation. It's about power.
It's the power. Yeah. It's the power of them. Yeah. And they look different. They smell. Everything about them is different.
Yeah.
Their eyes, their smell. It's just, everything is just.
Yeah.
And it's twisted.
Okay, another question. Death penalty. What do you think about the types of ways that we do it? So we've got firing squad, injection, electrocution. What do you think about being in prison and that people are awaiting death in these ways?
It's very intense. I knew somebody that was fighting a death penalty case and got ultimately sentenced to death while I was in jail waiting to go to prison. And it's like, he did some horrific shit. Like, he didn't hurt any kids, right? But it doesn't matter. He killed a cop in a whole situation. And anyway, so it's one of those things where I understand it. I get it. However, unless I was the victim, God forbid, or knew a victim, or my family member was it's one of those things that it's almost impossible to know until you know. Because it's easy to say you're against something, but then God forbid something happens to your kid or something like that. Then you're like, oh, I'm going to go kill this person. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, and then to me, that's the hardest. Like, people are like, oh, they just sit on death row. And it is literally the worst punishment of all. Sitting there for 20 years, 15 years, knowing that nothing you do matters, and they're going to put you on a table and put a needle. And I understand that if one person was innocent, then the whole. But it's such a. But that's like saying, how many did we stop arresting people? Like, how far does it go? And I guess it's one of those things where your own personal belief and your situation depends on how people feel about that. It's just, all you got to do is, and this is the argument I have with, not argument, but debate I have with people a lot is, well, ask yourself this: if he did that to a family member of yours, a kid of yours, and you could kill him, what would you do? I kill him. I do that. How would you do it? I torture him. All right. But at the same time, you're like, it doesn't make it right though. So it's one of those situations that I guess you have to hopefully never know. And seeing some people, and then you feel for people that were innocent and spent 30, 40 years, and it's a flawed system. But I mean, it's the system we have. So, I mean, I don't know. That's a hard one to really put in perspective, because I've seen it from both sides of like.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mind fuck for me, but I can't even imagine for you, because you have seen it from both sides.
Yeah, I remember the guy got sentenced to death, and I was in like a high custody unit in the jail, and like they got death row inmates, and everyone's kind of isolated. I'm waiting to go to prison. He's waiting. He gets a death sentence, and I remember they bring him the phone, and it was like hearing a child. It's like, this guy was this big gangster, and he loved all the attention, but when it was real, and it was that moment where he knows he's going to go to Florida State Prison and be put to death, most likely. Mom, I love you. Like, it was like a child speaking again. And at the same time, you feel bad, but then I'm thinking, well, how would the victims feel? Would they feel good? It's like you said, It's a mind. Seeing it from both sides is like, it's just horrible on every angle.
I want to tell you a story and just get your feedback, and then we'll end. But so I did a lot of fertility treatment when I was working in Atascadero State Hospital. So inside maximum security prison, everyone's nuts. And the day I found out I was pregnant, no one knew. No one would have known. But one of the really, really high-ranking gangsters in there said, you need to meet me in the visiting center, which is weird because it's kind of free-roaming we can talk. We don't have to wait to go to the visiting center.
Yeah.
So I go there and he says, they know you're pregnant. They're taking bets on who's going to kick your belly and kill the baby. And this is the last time you step foot in here.
Yeah. Wow. And that is crazy. I mean, that's horrific. I'm sorry you had to go through that, but it's the realities of the demon. It's a monster. It's a horror house, and like house of horror. Excuse me,
Yeah.
not a horror house.
Well, it's a
Don't call it
whorehouse in certain cells.
there's nothing. Yeah, you got Mick Minaj over there, but anyway, it's a serious. But what it'll be is they don't have any regard for their employees, especially if somebody is doing their job correctly. They're gonna look at you like you're a bad person for. What do you think? This is not how it goes here. You're gonna fall in line, and they have their or like with a lot of women too that work in corrections, they're almost expected to be in relationships with men and officers also. And if they don't, she thinks she's too good. Oh, I think she likes inmates. So they like put you out there. They put your business out there. And a lot of times what that was about is probably an officer saying, man, fuck her. Like I'll give some of you this, this, and this if you do this to her. Almost like somebody was mad about something, and for anybody to leak that to an inmate already put you in that's insane. And then that sounds like an officer or somebody was like, hey, that lady that she made up some rumor lie, and you guys handle that for me, and I'll make sure just the most basic privilege, and that's the scary thing. I'm glad you got out of there. And
Yeah,
but that shows
your take on that's interesting. Like, actually, I never thought about other staff being involved.
It's usually it'll be usually like an inmate like that who's like the high rank and shock. Like he doesn't want to see women and children get hurt. He doesn't like that. That's a weakness, especially organizations in prison that have been like around for 20, 30, like they don't want that blemish. Not saying they're all these righteous, but that's one thing people don't do. It's like you don't kick a pregnant woman if you do that. So he probably, because if he was like a shot caller or which he was, like you said, he would have been able to put an end to that unless it was coming from authority, usually. Like, because nobody would really step to an inmate and be like, hey, man, we're going to kick this pregnant lady. Because they would literally be like, have their face cut open and you got to get, because that's just as bad as being a child molester or rapist, anything like that. It sounds like it might have been from the internal.
Wow.
I mean, and that's usually where most of the violence stems from. That's where 90% of all altercations I had, they weren't started by them, but the fuse was lit by them, and I had to react accordingly. So yeah, it doesn't shock me at all.
Wow. I never thought about it from that perspective. And my husband was a psychologist there too, but no one knew. So I thought,
yeah, they're dirty. Like,
fuck.
People would never believe it. And I always heard things before I went in, and going from the juvenile prison is different. They're more of like military boot camp kind of, but then you go there and you hear this stuff, and they always say, it's not the inmates you got to worry about, it's these officers. And then you start seeing them killing inmates or bringing and so when you see that, there's nothing, and you can't write a letter and say, hey, I'm going to call your superior, and they're like, oh, hand me the letter, please. Let me see let me see what you got there for me. Even a sick call, they'll bring you there like they did to that guy. Like a lot of times they'll put a fake sick call in, and if they don't like you or they like if anything, and like that inmate, if somebody would have found out, they bring them to medical where there's no cameras, and they beat them to death and say, oh, it's natural causes. It's insane. It truly is. So yeah, I think that sounds like some internal situation, regardless if it was inmate and officer or just who knows. But I'm guarantee an officer, 100% somebody leaked your information, and the fact that wasn't immediate, like that's just insane. That's just very But
fucking wow, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's intense.
Yeah.
It's very intense.
Okay. So where do you go from here? What's life look like?
So I've got a very simple structure, very disciplined. Now, don't get me wrong, shit gets crazy, but having my son, obviously that's my priority. I work out, train. I used to, when I first got out of prison, I was heavy into kickboxing and MMA. I would just, everywhere I'd go, all over New York, South Carolina, Georgia, just fight and everything. It was more, I wanted to give myself like that validation, I guess, and be like, I'm not this, and then it ended up opening doors, but I still stay in that world where it's wake up, take care of my son, work out, train, take care of my son, eat, read a book, documentary, repeat. And I keep it like that. And, obviously it's not perfect all the time. I just know that I can't ever reach out to anybody or just do anything. It's just, my life is now to be the best. Everything I went through to me now is so my son hopefully will never have to experience 1/10 of anything I've ever experienced. And that's really what I do is just try to be a better man every day. I don't have like the new year, new me. It's just every day I have to evolve every day.
So if
I can't go back to that.
if there's something that you can gain from us talking today and your story being shared and fucking epic advice, I think is life-changing for people listening. But what could you gain from this? What can the world give you that would add to you?
So the one of the best parts of everything that I talk about and do is that it's like, like to live is to suffer, to find meaning is, the whole, it's like the fact that, I don't know, I've read a couple books, but,
so cheesy. I love it.
Okay. So, but all kidding aside, it's being able to know, like, I endured some serious stuff, like stuff that I talk about a lot of stuff, but some stuff I'll never be able to talk about in life. And knowing that I was able to endure that and become better through that, it's okay, that's good for me. But not only that, I'm able to bring this to the world and say, look, like, this is what you need to do to protect your kids. This is, and almost it's eye opening and like, wait a minute, like, and hopefully I could just help one parent. I know it's like the corny thing to say, just one person to be able to protect their kid better, or someone that's going through and feels like nothing's working and they're ready just to give it all up. The system, it just to keep fighting and fighting. I promise you, it'll work. They want you to quit. They want you to stop. They want you to believe that you're doing the wrong thing. But your kid, you cannot give up on your kid. You can never be wrong. You can never be wrong for doing something you feel is right for your kid. And that's going through the hell I went through. I was able to give people this advice and this eye-opening experiences to say, oh no, they don't give a shit. Oh, none of that matters. Only you as mom, you as dad.
Yeah.
Fuck a shopping cart. You need to put that kid go, and trust your instinct and stop playing, because when it happens, you're going to say, there's no excuse. I guess that's the best thing. I guess the hell I went through gives me a chance to speak to the world so they don't have to endure or see these evil people that exist in all aspects of our society.
Yeah.
Every day. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and fuck the shopping cart.
Fuck that shopping cart. That's how I feel. For real.
There you go. I got one fan. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Intentionally Disturbing. I hope you enjoyed meeting the Viking and that you enjoyed his perspective. Maybe it was a different perspective than you anticipated. Maybe you learned something. Maybe you learned something that you didn't want to know. But I really hope that maybe you took in something that the world has kept you from seeing, and the rose-colored glasses might be a little more clear now, because there's a whole part of the world that I hope you never have to experience, and he has, and he can give us a glimpse into something that really, really sucks at times, and he had the ability to show us his resilience and how he made it through. I'll see you next time.